Yeah.
Can I ask you to briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Sutirtha Dutta. I am a wildlife biologist. I grew up in Kolkata, did my studies in Kolkata. And at that time, I didn't know where my life would lead to. But eventually, it led to Dehradun, where I continued my studies in the Forest Research Institute and then the Wildlife Institute of India, and chose a career of a wildlife professional. So I'm an ecologist and I like studying open habitats like grasslands and deserts and the wildlife that uses these areas along with human beings. And the particular ones that I study are bustards, which are very large, big birds, also very rare and endangered. And I've been studying these birds and these landscapes for almost 17 years now. So I did my PhD on them. And eventually, I was a researcher in Wildlife Institute of India, briefly in Bombay Natural History Society. And then again, I joined Wildlife Institute of India as a faculty in 2017. So I'm a scientist over there now. And as part of my work, I teach students and IFS trainees in the Wildlife Institute of India on population ecology, quantitative methods, and conservation biology. And one of the main field projects that I supervise is on research and conservation of bustards and these desert grasslands, largely based in Rajasthan. So I'm the lead scientist of that project that currently undertakes conservation breeding and scientific research-based habitat management of great
I think your
Indian
network's
bustards and
not.
lesser florican in Rajasthan.
Oh, you're back.
That's my intro.
Nice. Thank you so much. So, couple of questions before we get into the natural history of the bustard. So, this is a bird that's endemic to the Indian subcontinent, right?
Yeah.
So, why
Yes.
was there a need to start a breeding center?
The Great Indian Bustard, it was in the conservation conscience of many people who have been working in open habitats and on bustards for a very long time, because it's a species that who are very iconic, very beautiful to look at, and they have been declining ever since. First because of historical hunting, then because of habitat loss. And back in 1970s, their number were already as less as 1,300 individuals, largely because of past hunting. And since 1980s, many then conservationists started voicing their concerns for the species, starting from Dr. Salim Ali, Dr. Asad Rahmani, and many others. Now, some conservation efforts were put in place, but it was not very effective, and the species populations continued declining. So when I started my PhD, when I did my PhD back in 2010, we highlighted the plight of the species and what is required to bring them back from extinction. We were predicting imminent extinction risk within 20 years from that point. And we identified that there are a few urgent actions that were required. These birds, they prefer grassland habitats. Grasslands were disappearing largely because of agricultural expansion and intensification, and also because of new infrastructure, particularly of renewable energy and other developments that were coming up in their landscapes. And because of that, the habitats are reducing. So there was a requirement of securing habitats, but these birds also inhabit and move around very large areas that are not necessarily protected and are also used for many other purposes. So it would have required a lot of time to bring everyone, the multiple stakeholders on board into a concerted conservation action for the species. But the number of the species was already so low, it was just about 150, 200 individuals, that we did not have that much time that all these habitat restoration actions could be done so quickly. The many threats of these areas that the bird faces like excessive livestock grazing, different kinds of other uses that are happening, they will not change within years.
So,
And the
sorry.
bird did not have that much time. So it was a way. So in order to buy some time to do habitat restoration, and also as an insurance policy, like we have our insurance policy, in the event we have an accident or a death, there will be something as a backup, right? So like an insurance policy, we decided on in commencing the conservation breeding program, so that we can collect some eggs from wild, bring them to
Right.
captivity, secure a captive population, and then use it later to rewild the habitat. This was the idea. But addition to that, I would say one more thing, that as a conservation biologist, we have two approaches. One is to diagnose the problems that are causing the species decline and to remedy them, which is called the declining population paradigm. And the other is that when the population is very small, typically 100 individuals, and currently single populations are much less than that. They are much less than 50 individuals. Now, when the population becomes so small that then there are a lot of random, unpredictable events that can happen, catastrophes and so on, which are not related to those problems that have caused the species decline. But those random things can themselves bring the species down to extinction. And there
Yes.
has to be a safety net. So conservation
Yes.
breeding is like the safety net, and you have to bump up the number of the individuals to give them that security, to give them that safety against those random forces pulling them down to the vortex of extinction. So this was the large idea behind which the
I can see
conservation center
you
was.
had to justify this many times before, I'm sure.
Oh, I had to
But
justify many times. Yeah.
but we won't go there. We'll just talk of the bird itself in this
Right.
interview. So you said the numbers were down to about 150
Yeah.
when you started work. What are the
Yeah.
population estimates in the wild now?
The last population estimate that we did in Rajasthan, which is the largest population, is about 120 individuals. This was back
Okay.
in 2018. The
Okay.
other populations are now very fragmented. They are in Kutch, in Gujarat, about 3 females over there. There are a few individuals, 2, 3 individuals in Maharashtra, some of them around Nanaj area in Sholapur, and maybe 1 or 2 in Chandrapur, Warora area. And there are about 5, 6 individuals in Bellary in Karnataka and the adjoining
Right.
areas of which is Kurnool. So all the other populations are very fragmented. They're less than 5 individuals each, which puts the total number to about 140 individuals currently. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so the population is declined, but I think the rate is slowed down. Yeah, 140 is like nothing. It's a
Yeah.
really low number.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sure you have many sleepless nights over this. But can you tell me about a day in the life of a bustard, of the Great Indian Bustard?
So a Great Indian Bustard's life day would start around the dawn, right after the dawn. And in the habitats that they live in, these deserts, dawns, there is still a nip in the air. It's slightly cold. The days are very hot, but the night cools off. So in the dawn, it's a little, still there is a nip in the air, and you would find the GIBs would wake up from their roosting spots. They prefer to sit together, 3, 4 individuals in a flock. Then they would probably just get up right after dawn, and because of the cold, their necks will be all tucked in, and they will be a little lethargic in the morning. Then eventually they will break out in a preening session. Probably they will just preen their feathers, and that's very contagious. So when one sees another preening, they also start preening. It's almost like us yawning, and that would continue for 5, 10 minutes. And as the sun goes up, they will break away for foraging. So they will move out of their roosting sites. Their roosting sites would typically be very like a barren open area where they can see a lot. And then they will start foraging and moving away from those roosting sites. Then they will walk around. And this will continue for at least 2, 3 hours. If it's this time of the year, like early summer, they would probably forage up to 9, 10 a.m. in the morning. And then again, they will go back into the shades of these shrubs And here in these kind of habitats, you do not have those big tall trees very often. There would be short shrubs about 1 to 2 meters, 2.5 meters in height, but there will be abundant shades of them. Some of them like caparis and all, like big, round, bushy shrubs. There's good shade around them. So they will sit next to them and spend the day over there when the sun is up there, very hot, scorching. But these microhabitats around the shade, they will typically be 6 to 8 degrees cooler. So they prefer to sit around during the day over there. And then again in the evening, around 2 hours before the sunset, 1 or 2 hours before the sunset, then they will again leave. They will again forage a bit. And gradually towards the sunset, they will start grouping again. Those 3, 4 individuals or another 2, 3 individuals. They have these fission fusion groups. They always don't stick around, but they try to find another partner because it's, again, safety in numbers. They try to find another small flock and they again go towards the roosting spot. And they roost only after it is completely dark. So they will keep moving and not sitting down. And it's probably a way to avoid predation, that they will only sit after it is completely dark and start roosting. And that would continue from 1 hour after 1 or 2 hours after the sunset to about 1 hour before the sunrise, something of that sort. The exact time differs from summer to winter, depending on the temperature of the day, the sunrise and sundown. But more or less, they avoid peak heat periods because the heat is quite a bit over here, and being large bodied, they trap a lot of heat. So they kind of cool off during the days.
Do they sleep on the ground?
Yeah, they sleep on the ground. Actually, they roost in these very open areas, which are slightly elevated. They wouldn't have a lot of grasses, very few grasses, so that they can see far. So they can get alerted by incoming predators and can spot them from very far.
Right.
And not only do they sleep on the ground, they do everything on the ground. They are completely terrestrial birds, and they lack the hind toe. So if you see their footprints, they're just 3 front toes and a pad. And because they lack the hind toe, they can't really perch on trees like and many other birds that can perch like this. They can't do that. So everything is like this for them. And therefore they sleep on ground, they rest on ground, they lay egg on ground, they do everything on ground.
Yeah. The hind toe is reduced. Is it raised? What is it?
The hind toe? No, the hind toe is absent. It's completely absent. Yeah, there is just a pad and 3 toes.
In all bustards?
In all bustards.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just a slight detour. Evolutionarily, did they evolve in Africa? Do we know that?
Yes. They evolved in Africa. They evolved in East Africa and just the sub-Saharan East Africa and South Africa. These are the 2 potential places where the early evolution and radiation took place. And from there, they started radiating and migrating all across. So Africa still has the largest number of species of bustards, but there were 2 that reached Europe, the great bustard and the little bustard. Then there are these Ardiotis bustards, which are Ardiotis that is in Africa, Ardiotis arabs, which is in Arabian Peninsula, Ardiotis nigriceps, which is the Great Indian Bustard. Nigriceps meaning a black colored crown. Yeah, nigriceps. And then ultimately the Ardiotis australis, the one that crossed
got to Australia.
Oceania and got to Australia. Yeah, the only bustard that went so far.
And is that the one that's most closely related to the Indian one?
Because they look very similar. Related. Yes, they're very similar.
Yeah. Which is also a bit like the evolutionary relations of the first humans to reach India and the first humans to reach Australia.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe similar timelines as well. Very cool.
Yeah, they found
quite like that.
Yeah, they found the similar ways to go across.
So when the bustard is foraging,
what
is it looking for?
So these guys are omnivorous, and they change their food preference depending on the food availability, but they are insectivorous omnivorous. So they prefer insects among,
Okay.
and not just insects, even animals, even small animals. So when they are foraging, they typically, what they do is, when they get out of their roosting sites, they will go out in individual tracks, often coming back, meeting again and again, going for food. They will typically look for grasshoppers, which become very abundant during the monsoon, or beetles, which are very protein rich, both of them. They will also look for lizards and the ones that you find over here, and
And
rodents,
snakes.
birds, snakes, of course, snakes. And each of these animals that they will look for, if they find them, they will grab their head, and they will basically shake them by dislocating the vertebra,
Right.
munch on the head to break down all the hard bones and ensure that it's completely munched and dead, and then they will swallow it up.
They kick like ostriches?
When they sometimes fight with each other during territorial aggression, they can kick. Otherwise, they are not so much of a kicker, but more of, they will pick, and they will pick on the head and kind of paralyze or stun the animal and then pick them up. But
Oh.
largely they forage on these small insects, grasshoppers, beetles, ants, termites. That is what they forage mostly on. And they will go
Okay.
continuously. So how they move, they will just walk very slowly. These are very stoic
Hmm.
birds.
Yes.
They're not the ones that rush and dart. And probably it's a
Yes.
way to conserve energy. They're very low BMR birds. So they will walk very gently and, almost glide through the grasslands. And when they do, they will continuously sway their neck back and forth. And it says that for birds, it increases the visual acuity. They
Yes.
get to see things better, judge distances better, and so on. And they have their eyes on the sides. When they're looking like this, they're actually not spotting an insect over here, but rather an insect that is over here. No? So when they
Oh,
see
very
something,
interesting.
they will actually look like this to get a better. So they will keep doing this and that and figure out where it is, and then go puck,
So
capture
it's
them.
not bifocal vision.
They Their bifocal vision is a little weak, because their eyes, unlike us humans, they have the eyes very laterally placed, like where
Right.
our ears are almost. And that's an
Right.
evolution to avoid predation. And what it has endowed them is a very large peripheral vision, so that they
Yes.
can avoid predators. Must have happened evolutionarily. The ones that had that got an
Yeah. Yeah.
advantage over the ones that didn't, and eventually the eyes were like that. But the overlapping area is very less. So where the two side visions overlap, which is the frontal vision, the binocular vision, that is typically like a narrow split of 17 degrees.
Okay.
And that is very, very small. Yeah, but nonetheless, they are quite effective and accurate in terms of pecking and catching insects. We get to see them very from close proximity in our center. So we know
Yeah.
how, like, they're extremely gentle, but as soon as they want to eat, they will go and eat. And they're very
Right.
accurate in that.
The moving sedately is where the name comes from, right?
Yeah, there was one bustards in Latin. One of the meanings is like a slow bird, a bird that
Yes.
moves slowly. But the other meaning
Yes.
is bird that treads, like tread, like walks, a bird that
Right.
walks. There are
Okay.
both these meanings. In some literature, you find the reference to slow bird, otistarda, bustarda is
Yes.
where bustard has come from. And in some literature, it says it means a slow bird. In some, it means birds that walk. Yeah.
Hmm.
But both
I like
quite
the slow
both kind of
sedate
fit
one.
in. Yeah, they are very slow. They are very slow
They
and
are, right?
straight, and
Yeah.
it's wonderful to watch them, because in the centers, when we see them closely, sometimes they're just standing with one leg, and they're putting the leg, but they're so slow in it that
Yeah.
it's
Very,
almost like the
very
ghost statue.
deliberate, I would say.
Yeah, yeah, like the ghost statue things we used to
Yes.
play. No? It's almost like that. They're
Yeah. Yeah.
taking that stuff.
Also, their hearing is quite good, right?
Yeah, their hearing is good. Their vision is fantastic. Like the peripheral vision is fantastic, and they depend mostly on vision, but their hearing is also good. They can hear from quite far. Yeah.
And fairly good smell.
Yes, we know that because again, when we give them different kinds of food in the center, we can figure out what they or not, and they have a
Yes.
sense of taste and smell. Of course, not as good as mammals who rely
Hmm.
a lot on smell, but yeah, they do have
Also, I
a
think
sense.
rearing them in the center tells you a lot about the cues they use, right? To
Yeah.
look for things
Yes.
or what interests them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a big thing. When we started raising these birds in center, we got to learn them very closely and we got to read them. Like when you see a behavior in field, sometimes it confuses you because you can't understand the cues. But here the cues are right around you and you can see them so closely. You can measure every movement of the bird. So you get to understand those behaviors and it's quite fascinating that way. So whenever suddenly we will see these birds just sitting down and then raising their heads and looking at things and then we will try to figure out what's going on and we'll check out and there is a raptor and its silhouette overhead. So then
Yeah.
we figured out that's what they do whenever there
Yes.
is a raptor, they keep watching and then they will just very stoically again sit down close to a bush.
Yeah. Makes you a better naturalist, I think.
Yeah, it makes you a better naturalist. Get a reference to what sort of
Yes.
behaviors they might do to what sort of cues and also
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
excites them and all. So, for example, how do they look for these, like visually, what attracts them as a food? A red color thing, a black color thing, a white color thing, what attracts them? So, we saw that largely black or red, something it attracts them. We also, so when we started our center back in 2019-20, there were these huge locust outbreaks that happened from Africa across Pakistan into this northwestern Indian border. And people, particularly farmers, were very annoyed. There were so much of locusts in their crops, but it was a very good season for bustards because they get a lot of insect rich diet. And it was a great season for us
Right.
also. So we used to catch a lot of these locusts and feed the birds. And they would like those adult big locusts, which will be slightly greenish with red dots on them. But then a juvenile version of these locusts, they look deadly. They look like this black, yellow, and black tribe, very bandit, happy with them. So they would typically avoid those dangerous looking black and white locusts. So yeah, you can see the preferences, what they like, what they don't.
Yeah. So in the wild,
I
what are
think the
the main
internet is a bit slow.
predators? Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Deadly looking, and they were not quite pleased by
Yeah.
them.
So I was asking, what are the main predators in the wild for bustards?
They don't have a lot of predators, but wolf, some large raptors like Bonelli's eagle, they can go after the adults. Even foxes, when the particularly for nesting females or roosting females, fox can very
Yeah.
cleverly and approach from behind, and they can also hunt. But largely, naturally speaking, evolutionary time, it would be the wolf and some
Turtles?
very powerful raptors like the Bonelli's eagle. And all of these we have over the long duration of our natural history observations, we have found these kind of predators. There were some wolves killing, hunting bustards in Maharashtra. We saw a Bonelli's eagle killing a Great Indian Bustard around the same place where our center is in Ramdevra. Fox
Also
also,
jackals
not so much, but they can,
and
but not.
feral dogs now?
Yeah, free-ranging dogs, because it's a more recent problem. Now the free-ranging dogs are exploding in the Great Indian Bustard population, and they can be a big problem. But for all
Mhm.
of these, apart from these few predators of an adult bird, the young ones have a lot of predators. Actually, anyone can like a fox, cat, mongoose, jackal, dog, anyone can eat a bustard net egg or a chick.
Right.
So there are a lot of predators for the eggs and the chicks, but not so much for the adult birds.
They mostly fly to avoid predators, right?
Yeah, actually at night they will just jump. They will explode and jump, and that is a response that they have again evolutionarily figured out just to perplex the predator. This is also what we understood when we started keeping birds at the center. And but yeah, flight is something that they would typically do during the day. During the day, they will, if they spot a potential predator. Oh, by the way, I forgot humans have been their largest predators over a very long time. That's their main predator, actually. We. But when they see us or other predator, they will be very vigilant, particularly during the day. So vigilance is something, scanning is something that they use profusely. You will just see them extending their necks and just stare at the horizon whenever they see a potential predator. And if the potential predator goes by, they will carry on with their behavior, with their activity. But as soon as they see something approaching, within 100 to 200 meters before they reach, they will just fly away. They are very shy. They just fly away.
Yeah, they're
Yeah,
really shy. I was going
extremely
to
shy.
ask you, why do you think that is? But maybe, as you said, humans are historically the greatest hunters of these birds. So do you think
Yeah,
that is the reason they
yeah,
co-evolved with humans?
yeah. Humans have, particularly these open habitats where the bustards are, they have also had humans for a very long time.
Yes.
Humans have been using these areas for their livelihoods, for pastoralism, agriculture, for
Implementing
very
their
long
diet.
time. Yeah. So they have had a lot of influence. And you can see that there are some areas where hunting has been more prevalent. And you see the birds more shy in those areas, just taking off immediately, flying off immediately, seeing humans from 200, 300 meters. Whereas there are areas where humans have not hunting them so often. There are some communities that revere them, that do not hunt them. You can find that in some parts of eastern Rajasthan, where there are a lot of Bishnoi communities. You can find them even in Kutch, where the hunting is not so prevalent in some areas. And there you don't see that much of fear in the birds towards humans. Even
Right.
they associate some artifacts, human artifacts, to be more threatening than others. So a vehicle is problematic. Someone getting down off the vehicle and walking is even more problematic. But farmers just doing their own work, or a camel cart or a cattle cart going, that is not so problematic. They are more tolerant towards that.
Yeah, I was reading some really depressing reports of people describing how tasty the bird is.
Yeah. Yes. And there are different versions of that. Some people found, they would say that it is very tasty. But if you read Babur's initial scriptures or other historians like Mahesh Rangarajan referring to those texts, they would say it's a very chewy meat. And so, yeah, but certainly they were eaten. They were eaten and they were used as trophies. There is no doubt about that.
So, what is their mating system like?
Oh, that's the most lovely part about them, and something that captivates people to a great extent. They have a really complex mating system. So I mean, in technical language, it is known as a exploded leg polygynous mating system. And it's like a recipe of sexual selection. But just in more common parlance, the males would basically come together, not too close to each other, but at least at 500 meters distance from each other. And they would perform this extremely elaborate display from elevated areas that females can see from very far off. And the display comprises of them basically puffing up their feathers, gulping in air, mixing it with saliva. Again, these are certain things that we understand by seeing birds from proximity in the center, what they're actually doing. Puffing in air, mixing it with saliva, and basically creating a balloon out of their neck that keeps dangling like a big beard. and they will cock their tail and they will just rotate. And then when they gulp in this air, they will also expunge that air, and that creates a very low pitch reverberating sound, like boom, boom, something of that, a double note, low pitch. And that kind of, you can hear it from at least a couple of kilometers, that sound.
Wow.
1 to 2 kilometers. And these males do not tolerate each other within 500 meters of each other. But they are also not like, they will be uniformly placed, like many mammalian territories, for example, tigers and all. You won't find two males like within such close proximity of each other in the whole landscape. But over here in bustards, what they do is they do not have these mating territories across the landscape. They will all congregate it and put it within a relatively small area out of the entire landscape that they're using, but still at a certain distance from each other, which is a minimum tolerable distance, not less than 500 meters or so. Now, they use these kind of arenas to perform these displays, and the females check them out, look for the best displayer or cues that we really don't understand what they're looking for. And there have been a lot of interest and studies on what exactly they are looking at and what is the purpose of these displays. Some say, some biologists believe it's an honest signaling. That means the individual is basically displaying how viable it is, how potent it is, that it can display, spend so much of energy in displaying, withstanding the risk of getting predated, withstanding other opportunities like foraging. They can do that. And that transmits some honest signal that the females are looking for. Now, the females, they visit the male territories whom they want to mate with. There will be a courtship for about 10 to 20 minutes when the male will basically display initially and then go, and the females will sit down and the males will peck on their head, peck on their beaks repeatedly, approaching the female from various positions. The females will just duck and then get hit by the male for a very long time. And we don't know, but it's probably a way of the males to ascertain the female's readiness to copulate or something like that, and they will continue pecking. And the actual mating takes less than a minute when the male approaches from behind, basically mounts the female, and then copulates. And immediately after copulation, the females will just leave the arena and then they will part ways. Immediately after mating, the male will resume its display. It will continue displaying for other females, and the female will go, and typically after 4 days, they will lay an egg. They can lay egg even without mating, but it will be an infertile egg. But if they mate and then lay, it will be a fertile egg, most likely, given the sperm quality and the female's viability and all that. And that happens within 4 days of mating. They typically lay that egg. Then the female incubates it for 23 days. It hatches it, and then it takes the chick along with her and feeds her, rears her, and that continues for almost 9 months. We have seen chicks remaining with females for almost 9 months. The intensity of caregiving is very high in the initial 2 to 3 months, and gradually it slows down. So these are precocial chicks. Immediately after hatching, within a day, the chick will walk behind the mother. The mother will forage, bring an insect, feed the chick. It will just stoop down and give the food, offer the food to the chick. The chick will just grab, and this continues. And that intensity of foraging is very high initially for the first 2-3 months, and then gradually it slows down. But even an older chick, like a 6 to 9 months chick, will still follow the mother. If the mother utters particular calls, they will quickly go towards the mother, knowing that, okay, there is some danger or something like that. So they continue to follow the mother, although they start finding their food and feeding by themselves by 3 months or a little more than that. They feed largely by themselves by that time. But they will continue moving with them.
And are they as tall as the females by then?
Yeah, so the females reach about 70, 80 centimeters from ground, and the males will be about 110, 120 centimeters like almost 1.2 meters chest height. The chicks reach almost adult size by 5 months. By 5 to 6 months, they are almost the female size. And male chicks start growing more than the female chicks by the time they're 3 months old. And about 8, 9 months, male chick will be just a little taller than the female.
Okay.
Yeah, they have a
When do they start breeding? At what age?
Oh, they start breeding pretty late. They are very slow breeders. They become sexually maturity at 4 years age, 3 to 4 years age. The earliest we have seen males starting to display in our center is 2 years, and females laying eggs is about 2.5 years. But the average in the wild is approximately 3 years is when they start becoming sexually mature. And they can live up to
yeah.
20 years. That's what we don't know exactly for the Great Indian Bustard because no bird was tagged and monitored that long. We have started doing it, but from closely related species and bustards kept in captivity, like the Great Bustard, Kori Bustard, and all that, it says that 20 to 25 years is the maximum longevity. That's the maximum longevity. But the expected longevity will be something around 15 years. That means the mean lifespan across all individuals should be about 15 years.
How did you tag the birds in the wild?
Oh, that's an interesting exercise. We tag them by using a technique that used to be applied by local trappers and hunters in the past. Our country has a very long, and you know that we had a very long heritage of trapping birds, and we had a lot of extremely good techniques of capturing birds and animals. And we are losing that knowledge. And that's a very sad part because it is also something that improves your natural history understanding. A hunter, in some ways, is one of the best naturalists because they have understood the bird and how to outwit the bird and the animal by capturing them. It actually requires decoding the bird and outwitting it. So we use this native technique where we have these pegs, wooden pegs, and nooses, like those fishing line nooses attached to them. And we have multiple of these nooses attached to each other by string. So we first identify where the birds are moving through their usual foraging routes, or where they are coming to occasionally drink water, or where they have nested, because they will keep coming back to those areas frequently. And then we cut those areas across using this long noose line. So these nooses are typically about 15-20 centimeter in height, just about the height where they walk like this. And when they're going through the noose, their foot goes in, and when they try to stretch it, the noose kind of constricts on their tarsal. And when they try to pull it, the noose keeps getting tighter and tighter. So they just become immobilized over there, and then they start jumping. The one thing they know when there is threat is to jump. They jump, and we remain positioned within 200 meters or so that we can just dash and catch the bird in less than a minute. And then when we grab hold of them, they are very powerful birds. They have explosive power, but so sometimes they just try to explode. So we have to be cautious and hold them. We blindfold them because another thing with birds is they have all these ticks, no? So one thing is as soon as you put a blindfold on them and cover their eyes, they are very calm. They just calm down immediately. So we blindfold them, and then we put a transmitter, which is very small and less than 2% of the bird's body weight. And it has loops on its sides through which we pass a harness. And we use different kinds of harness, like two kinds of harness. One is an elastic harness and another is a Teflon harness. A Teflon harness is very good. It doesn't degrade with the weathering. And we put it as a backpack with a cross. So it goes on, so it fits in the back, and the noose goes around the body, around the wing. And just like we carry a bag, we place a harness just like that. But it's just that it's a cross harness. So there is a cross right around the heel, right around the sternum, the birds over here. And it doesn't impede flight, it just flies around. and you start
Yes.
locating the bird. Gives a lot of information.
Yes, I'm sure. I look forward to that information eventually. So, coming to these spaces that they cohabit with humans, you said there are places in Kutch and amongst some communities in Rajasthan where there's no hunting
Right.
and they coexist with humans, right?
Yeah.
So, they
In the sense
tolerate
that,
humans.
I mean, in the sense that they cohabit with humans, maybe not out of choice, but they do cohabit with humans in many places. But in some places where historical hunting has been less, you can see the fear, you can see that they tolerate humans to a closer proximity, maybe within 100 meters or so, as opposed to shying away and flying away from humans in that. Yeah.
But what do these landscapes look like?
Historically, much of the bustard landscapes would be used for extensive pastoralism. Pastoralism used to be the main form of livelihood in many of these grasslands. And typically, historically, there would be these nomadic or transhuman pastoralism, which is people with a lot of livestock foraging, grazing an area, then moving to another area, then grazing that area, and then continuing like that. They would have these annual cycles of migration. And that was an adaptation to deal with the low resource conditions of these desert and grassland conditions, grassland areas. But during the colonial period, these livestock grazing technique or pattern was changed because of two reasons. One is the British did not, they found the nomadic pastoralists very difficult to tax. So many of these nomadic pastoral tribes were then labeled as a criminal tribe. And it's also this extensive grazing, which was not very productive in the Western European sense. So all of these areas were labeled as wastelands since then, and they were prioritized for more aggressive and productive developmental forms. And many herders could herd livestock as a secondary source after they are farming a particular piece of land. So they were made sedentary into pieces of farmlands where they would basically, they became sedentary and they would intensively graze these areas. So over the time, because of these policies and also because of other things, the other factors, socio-political factors, the nomadic pastoralism has reduced. It still exists, but it is much reduced. And the general form of pastoralism that now happens is people reside within villages. They and a few of these villagers herd the livestock that belongs to everyone in the village. That is the kind of livestock herding that currently goes on. And there is a professional shift, the livelihood shift from pastoralism towards agriculture. That happened over time, but particularly in the last century. And typically during 1980s to post 1980s, this shift has been more and more prominent. That people are leaving livestock pastoralism or making it a secondary income source and depending more on agriculture, more on farming. Yeah.
So, two questions. Are there pastoralists inside protected areas there? And is there a place for the bustard in agricultural landscape?
No, that's a very important question as well. Coming back to this thing, historically, both these livelihoods, they were low intensity in the sense that although they were livestock, the livestock density was less and there were a lot of rangelands. But as agriculture started expanding, the rangelands, the grassland areas started reducing. But the livestock density, particularly in these landscapes, Rajasthan, Gujarat, it did not reduce. Rather, it increased because of better livelihoods like milk production, dairy, and meat, all of that. The livestock numbers are still quite high. And therefore, the high livestock numbers against the low pasture availability increased the livestock intensity, livestock grazing intensity quite a bit, which resulted in excessive livestock grazing. But this is something of a recent development. In the past, where the intensity of livestock grazing was less and the agriculture was largely rain-fed in these areas, During monsoons, people will sporadically cultivate and then they will leave cultivation. And these kind of landscapes are quite compatible with bustards. They prefer these kind of landscapes because a little bit of grazing, regulated grazing, it creates that mosaic of short and tall vegetation which the bustards love. And when there is a rain-fed agriculture, yeah, for the time being, there are people walking over there, but eventually they harvest their crops and move out. And then there are some other things that are there in the fields, like the harvested grains which have not been collected. And there is some natural regeneration of vegetation that happens. So all of those things the bustards feed on. So bustards like landscapes that are moderately used by humans, like low intensity agriculture, low intensity pastoralism. But as soon as the intensity increases, that means the number of livestock per area increases, and agricultural intensity in terms of pesticides, fertilizers, all those agricultural inputs, and the agriculture becomes year round. That means cultivation, sowing, harvesting, sowing, and again cultivation, multiple crops in a year. When it becomes that intensive and there is permanent human use and permanently the fields are under crop with very less insect resources because of the inorganic pesticides and all, that is the time when bustards leave those areas. They do not find an these are still grasslands, but agriculture, more intensive agriculture, it changes the habitat drastically. The soil is turned up ever so frequently. It's no longer a grassland. It's a very different culture is the when the agriculture becomes too intensive in the form of inorganic inputs, fertilizers, pesticides that reduces insect and food for the birds. When it is year round, all through the year, and people are always in those fields, and the birds keep moving away from people because of that, the fear of being hunted, and they don't have enough food. That's a kind of landscape that they don't prefer. But rain-fed agriculture, one-time agriculture in a year without so much inputs and low-intensity grazing is something that they're perfectly compatible with. Also, in these landscapes, again, because of the wasteland tag, when infrastructure comes in, these are also these human artifacts like a road coming in, a few houses being built up, or the energy infrastructure coming in. All these kind of things, these kind of artifacts in the landscape are not very compatible with the species conservation. Again, they keep moving away from areas which are very infrastructurally developed. Probably again
So,
because they're associated with the kind of human presence and fear and so on.
and currently, are herders allowed inside the protected areas?
Oh yeah. So for example, this is another thing. The protected area image that we have is typically borrowed from the protected areas that we see for, let's say, tigers or these forested landscapes, which are almost inviolate in the sense there is no consumptive human uses inside at least the core areas. On the other hand, almost all the protected areas in these bustard landscapes, which are the open natural ecosystems of Western India, they have no concept of these inviolate areas. There are people staying inside protected areas, the people using areas within protected areas for livestock grazing, even for agriculture, across all sanctuaries. Whereas only some areas which have been fenced off by forest department as enclosures, they are the only areas which are managed by forest department as a sort of area specifically for the birds, which are managed for wildlife, especially the Great Indian Bustard. Those are the areas where livestock herders don't get in. But these areas are also less than 5% of the area of the protected area. So Desert National Park, for example, is 3,000 square kilometers, and only about 200 square kilometer of this area will have these fenced enclosures. The remaining 80%, sorry, the remaining 95% of the area are used by people for livestock herding, agriculture, and so on. As long as these are low intensity, the bustard can manage.
But so this agriculture, it's on state land, like it's not on privately owned land.
No, it's on state land, it's on revenue land. Majority of the agriculture that happens again in these open habitats, bustard landscapes, they are on revenue lands which are not owned by people. Because over here, due to the low rainfall, people never felt the need of owning lands, because owning lands to cultivate them intensively was not required or economically beneficial. These are such low potential, agriculturally low potential areas. People would cultivate an area, the next year they would cultivate some other area close by, and the next year they will cultivate some other area, and they again probably come back. When there will be good rainfall, they predict there will be good rainfall, they will cultivate. In some areas they will not, and this has been the case for the vast majority of the time. But recently, the incentive for cultivation has increased, not for, because of two reasons. One is the common crop that is grown in Rajasthan is known as guar, it's cluster bean, and it found industrial use. And because of that, the money they were getting was very high. And that kind of made agriculture more profitable, and everybody started cultivating over here. But the bulk of the cultivation that happens is on revenue land with some on private land.
Okay. Can you think of a place where there have been people living and the bustard living alongside them? Is there a place like that?
Yeah, so all of these places are where people and busters have been living for a very long time, but these are not necessarily places where the bustard population will remain viable. The bustard population have been declining across the country, and it has declined the most in areas where human use of land has increased considerably. It is found in Rajasthan, in the western part of Rajasthan, in such numbers now, because over here cultivation and all the other things have not reached at a rate that it has reached the other areas. It's the remoteness and the difficulty in cultivating these areas that has actually kept the bustard alive over here. Now, given this situation, the bustard will remain in these areas provided we continue using the land in low intensity. Then the bustard
Right.
population will remain viable. If we start increasing the frequency of cropping or intensity of livestock grazing and so on, then the bustard population will also disappear from here, like it disappeared for the rest of the country where we have done the same thing. Yeah.
So, coming to the last part of the conversation, which is about imagining a place. And Srini is not here, but one question he's asked me to ask you:
Yeah.
is there a recipe that you would recommend for humans to coexist with bustards?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the recipe would be something that we always have used even in the past, that we need to spare some areas and we need to share some areas. We need to have a combined land use planning of sparing for wildlife and sharing that would work. So as long as there are some protected grassland areas which are not overgrazed, which are not converted to agriculture, where the birds can breed, they can lay eggs, they can rear the chicks, that is the minimal that is required. Now, what we have seen over the years, we had tagged quite a few birds. I've tagged about 12 birds, and we have monitored them for almost 5, 6 years. And what we have found is that whenever they find these protected grassland enclosures which are fenced, they use it very intensively, and particularly for the breeding season. So we looked at how what makes them do that, and we sampled their food, insects particularly, and we found that these protected grassland enclosures have many times more insect abundance, particularly grasshoppers, during monsoon when they time their breeding. And after and majority of the females were laying eggs within these protected grassland enclosures, although just 5% of the area is in this form of protected grasslands. 80% of nests were found within these protected grasslands. So they were like disproportionately favoring these areas. And because there was food in form of insects that they can raise their chicks on, breeding is a very energy and protein intensive activity. They require a lot of rich protein diets, and they are getting it over here. Now, once the breeding season is over, then they start moving out of these protected grassland enclosures, and they can venture around in these areas which have rain-fed agriculture, which have low intensity livestock grazing, and they forage in those areas. Now, as long as the landscape has a matrix of this, a few protected grassland enclosure, not more than 20% of the area, and the remaining area is used to such in a low intensity like it has been, then the busters and humans can surely coexist. Of course, there are some recent problems that are coming up, which is largely infrastructure that the birds cannot detect because of again their low frontal vision, and they're colliding with them and dying. These can be the power lines, these can be agricultural fences, any of those things. So those things need to be mitigated very strategically in areas which are being intensively used by the birds. Those are additional threats. There are some new forms of threats like the free ranging dogs. So the free ranging dogs also need a very dedicated, very targeted management. But these are surgical management that needs to be done. But apart from that, the general people, the general public, and bustards, I think the recipe for coexistence is this: spare some area and share the remaining. Even 20%, 80% would work. Yeah.
Cool. Last question. Can you tell me about some interesting behavior of the birds in your breeding centers that you've found out or that you're really fond of or that you like? Any behavioral tics or something that they do?
Well, yeah. So we knew about the male bustard that is and their display. That's extremely elaborate. What we didn't know was that female birds also display, particularly when they're coming of age, they're reaching sexual maturity, or they're hitting that breeding, when their reproductive hormones are surging, they start displaying. And that we figured out in our center. So we saw some females trying to display just like a male and looking at other females and displaying. And then some females are also displaying similar way. It was almost like contagious, and one looking at the other and starting to display. And we were wondering what's going on. Are we raising the chicks in a way that is increasing their testosterone level? It is something in the diet or something else. And we were quite scared for a very long time that what is it happening. But then we realized that it's a very natural thing, and female bustards also display. And we started looking into the field, and we started observing similar behavior once we saw this. And when you go back to the literature on bustards, their natural history observations and all, you don't find it so often that female bustards are displaying and all that. But and therefore we didn't have the search imagery for looking at this in the field. But when we saw this and when we started looking for it, we found that this is actually quite common, and not only in this area but even in other areas. When we started looking for it, we started seeing it. There are many such things. There is a certain predictability in their behavior. So when we have a lot of birds that we are monitoring closely that are breeding, we find a strange predictability in their behavior. After, if they will typically lay eggs after every 14 days, just before they lay, they show a certain restlessness that starts about 6 to 7 days before they are about to lay eggs. And they show a certain restlessness. They will continuously pace around their cage. They will feel a bit nervous. They will feel a bit jumpy. They will just jump around. And initially, you would not understand why the bird is behaving like that. And but when we saw these things very predictably over every female, we now join the dots. And then after that, they will mate, then they will start consuming calcium. We give them this cuttlefish bone, they will start consuming, and immediately 2 3 days after that they will lay eggs. So there is a certain predictability in their behavior, in their breeding behavior, which from observations from data you start realizing. So all of these things are very new and they are very fascinating to us. It was also quite fascinating to know many of these behaviors are very hardwired, very instinctive. When we offered them lizards or snakes, the mother didn't have to teach them how to eat because we were the mothers here, and but they knew exactly how to eat. They did exactly what a wild female or wild bird would do. They will catch hold of the head, they will dislocate the vertebra, and they will gobble it up. All these
Right.
kind of things, the displaying, the reproduction, all of them, it's these are all hardwired, very instinctive. They do a kind of threat display where when they are excited about something, when you suddenly approach them, they will just open their wings and just like these dragons, they will, yeah, it's, yeah, there are a lot of fascinating behaviors that you get to see in the center. It's
And you
cool.
said even if there's an unseasonal rain, they can sometimes begin to lay eggs, right?
Oh yeah. So in the field, what we see is majority of their eggs, almost 50% of their eggs are right around June, July, just before the rain hits. Because over here, the resources are very seasonal, and they typically peak right after the southwest monsoon hits around July. So we'll see 50% of the eggs around June and July. But throughout the year, we will see a few eggs here and there. And if there is a rainfall in some other time like February, March, we will see a few females having nests. They somehow realize, somehow they figure out those environmental cues and just lay eggs.
Does that happen in your center as well?
Yeah, it happens in the center as well. So in the center, of course, because of better nutrition, we are seeing more egg production, early breeding, and more breeding, which has started from 2 years. So the breeding starts from March. But if there is a rainfall, even after 7 to 14 days, you see some females somehow gauging that and laying. You will find four
Right.
five females quickly showing breeding signs. It's very interesting how do they
Yeah.
do that environment.
It's amazing things you can find out by studying the bird more closely.
Yeah, both closely and from far. The combination
Yeah.
is,
I
uh,
once I once raised a bulbul chick,
yeah,
and a really cool thing I realized is when they start to learn to fly, you would never realize this until you've raised a bird, is that they're more confident flying up to something than flying back down.
like that. Yeah.
So he or she would happily fly up to on top of a cupboard, but then would have to gather its courage to come back down.
So cool, no? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. How's the bulbul chick doing? Has it
It
or
was no, it left one day. Um, I would like to hope that it went away, but I cannot be sure.
yeah.
So I also realized how territorial bulbuls are. And yeah. Anyway, I'll tell you more about it in a minute. Is there anything else about the bustard which you think we did not cover that you had in mind to share?
No, I think we covered quite a lot. But maybe just one thing is that one reason why many people talks about Great Indian Bustard conservation is that for a very long time it has been the rallying point for conservation of these open habitats, because there is
Right.
not many species over here that attracts the public attention to that extent, that attracts the awe of people because of their flamboyant displays and their unique reproductive system, just their royal gait or something like that. There's something that attracts a lot of public attention, and you can see that the number of wildlife photographers or that come from there, the number of discussion that happen around that. And it would be really sad if the species disappears, because if you think that you wouldn't see these displays, a landscape without the bustard displaying, that's a little difficult to fathom. It's a different
Yes.
landscape then.
Yes.
And also,
I
yeah,
completely get that. Like the magic is missing.
the magic is missing. So, for example, these birds, there is another species, the lesser florican, for example, another bustard. So, if you have been to Ajmer, these are all cropland areas, and you see the same cropland kind of habitat all across. If you travel from let's say Delhi, Uttarakhand through Punjab, Haryana, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, you will see just these. When if you go by train, you will see exactly the same habitat, like kilometers, miles and miles of just crop fields. But what makes that Ajmer area different is just this species, the lesser florican, that suddenly emerges, appears from nowhere in the monsoon, and starts displaying, just jumping out of that crop field. And that is what makes that Ajmer landscape different from every other that agricultural landscapes around that bird. Without that bird, it would be exactly the same as any other agricultural landscape. That is
Why does it come just there?
So they are okay. They migrate to Deccan, India during the winters, and they again come back over there. But when they are over there, they largely remain hidden, and nobody would see them. They are very camouflaged. But when they start displaying, when they start breeding, the males perform a display just like the Great Indian Bustard,
Yes.
but in a different way. You have seen that, no? They just jump in the air. But the point is that these birds are so magical, and they bring something new to a landscape that
Why do they not go to the rest of North India?
this is what I think is these are the areas which used to have the largest swaths of grasslands, largely northwest Rajasthan, and the florican had been in Haryana, Punjab, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Gujarat. That is where they would breed. But again, the grassland habitats changed earlier and faster in all these other areas, Punjab, Haryana particularly. And what remained was where they stayed along. As these areas became agricultural, the bird was not probably not doing very well as they were doing in grasslands, but they still adapted, adjusted to some extent. Yeah, but nonetheless, I would think that this landscape will become very different if the bustard is not there, and
Yeah,
therefore it's a moral responsibility for us to not let that happen.
that is true. That is true.
Yeah. With conservation breeding, at least the total extinction is out of question. But whether we bring back the species effectively or not will depend on a lot of restoration measures. And of course, the natural history understanding of the species will benefit that because you know what they need and they don't need. As a society, how we get to what implementing what they need
Yes.
is the really important point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sartaj.
Let me